Rob, thanks for joining us today. We've got Rob Percoco on, I think this is 4 or 5 or 6 of the How I Use Ambition series. So pumped to have you. Not on site with him today, but I have been to the Ron Konkoma station before. Anyways, I'm Jared, one of the founders here at Ambition. We're going to be doing a deep dive into National Business Capital today and how and why they use Ambition. And Rob's, kind of a super admin. So I'm super excited to talk with him today because he's done some really cool stuff in tying, pretty robust phone system and a very robust Salesforce instance into Ambition to drive the sales team across a few different roles. So we're going to look at how he does that kind of from a setup perspective, and then some of the main stuff they do. A lot of really cool TVs they've got. So we'll just kind of run through how National Business Capital is using Ambition over the next 20 or 30 minutes or so. Rob, if you want to do a quick intro of you and what you guys do at National Business Capital, we'll dive right in.
Sure. Sounds great. All right. So National Business Capital is actually a financial services company. We do alternative lending. Basically any small, medium-sized business, even larger businesses, if they need any money, if they can't get financing through any traditional route through a bank, they would come to us, and we broker the relationship between different lenders to give them the financing that they need. National Business Capital has been around for about 10 years now. The company has evolved from a previous company. I've been around since basically day one when it was just 2 partners. At the time, I was just doing tech support on the side for a separate company. And then as my role has grown, I've become full-time here, and I'm now the technology manager here at National Business Capital. I lead all the technology projects, anything that's coming in from day-to-day use of help desk for different issues that we have on the day-to-day, or any of the Salesforce issues that we come into, or when we're looking to work with new vendors on any kind of improvements to our sales process. Before working here full-time, I was a web developer for about 5-6 years. That's where I got much of my coding background that allows me to really, take a hold of Salesforce data and improve the processes here. And then I had done on the side, I had done some project management as well, some small-time computer repair. So that gave me my technology edge, and then has kind of fueled my love for technology ever since.
Yeah, you've always impressed me with your knowledge and ability to connect systems. So excited to build on that here today. Going back, so we started talking like you guys use Ambition maybe a year and a half, maybe just shy of that. We started talking probably 18 months ago. What made you guys kind of take wade the waters? What were you looking for? What was the issue and or gain you were hoping to accomplish with a tool like Ambition? I can't fully remember.
Yeah. So at the time we were running into a lot of issues with our phone systems. We had kind of been passed around back and forth through a few different solutions, not just for the backbone of the actual phone itself, but a way of getting data into Salesforce and then reflecting that data. At the time, we had kind of seen some different offices, and we had seen some people that had some TVs up in their office. So we had put up a few TVs on the sales side, about 4 of them, and we were looking to put data on them. And we had started off with a web page that we had developed internally that just would basically be database driven, where we can put up different stats and have them shown for the sales team. But eventually we started looking to different options to see what was out there. We ended up on a BI tool initially that we had found that allowed you to present the data onto TV, but it was not very nice looking, and it led to some burn-in on the screens just because it wasn't really formatted for TVs. We had looked into different gamification platforms because it was something that we were looking to increase with the sales productivity, but we also wanted something that was going to give us reporting capabilities for our management staff so that they would get the reports that they need in addition to motivating the sales team. And for me being a technology background, I wanted something that was going to be as flexible as possible, something that I could customize if I wanted to, and to give me all the options that I was looking for. So I had started looking around, and that's where I kind of found Ambition.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I don't remember everything about the sales team. I know there's a few different groups and some cool metrics. I'm excited to just revisit all of this with you, and it'll be a good refresher for me and learning more about the business. But these things are usually one part are customers wondering how other people use these things, another part like people looking for tools like this, kind of like you were, and being a technology guy, a lot about systems working together and or not working well together. And that is ultimately everybody's biggest concern is like, okay, can it work with my data? Like, I hear their sales rep telling me that, but in practice, does it work? So that's what I'm pumped about to talk with you today. And we can kind of do this however. I think, tell us about your sales stack. So like, I know it's Salesforce, but what makes up the technology stack for you guys today?
Sure. For right now, I mean, we have our backbone for our phones that we use. We use 8x8. We've been using them as a VoIP provider for, basically since day one. They have been pretty reliable. They had some phone solutions as far as data for bringing data into Salesforce, but it wasn't effective enough for us. We had, like I said, we had been through a bunch of different phone solution providers to give us that dialer aspect and the reporting into Salesforce that we needed. And the latest one we have right now is New Voice Media, and they've been working great. They work great with Ambition, and we'll get into that later about the data that they bring. From a sales point of view,
is 8x8 still the backbone, or are you?
8x8 is still the backbone, so they're still providing the dial tone, and then we're just using New Voice Media on top of it. New Voice Media does provide, I think they have a web-based phone system, but it's not. Here we have more tradition. We like the sales guys like their desk phones, and they refuse to give them up for just plugging into the computers just yet. So as of right now, we're still on 8x8. But the big thing for us is really when it comes to anything that's in our sales stack is data integrity, and that's one of the things that Ambition brought to us was it's shown light on our data in our Salesforce org, and it pointed out any of the loopholes. And I think it's very important, just from the very starting point, is that if that data is not accurate, it kind of throws off the entire thing. And the basis of gamification is that if I go in there and I have a sales contest with my sales team to say whoever placed the most calls or sent the most emails today is going to get X prize. Well, if some guy sent out emails on his cell phone, but because he sent it on his cell phone, it wasn't tracked for some reason, that's going to cause an issue. Or if some guy was taking a bunch of phone calls and there were incoming calls versus outgoing calls, he would want those shown as well. So for us, it was very important to find the products that were going to give us the data that we needed, but not only occasionally, but all the time for everything we could.
Right.
So when it comes down to those data points, for phone calls, we wanted inbound and outbound call time. We wanted to be able to tell if a call came in, from different sources. But we also wanted to be able to tell if that outbound call was made off a dialer list, or it was just off the cuff or an appointment that was set up. When it comes to emails, we wanted to make sure that any email that got sent out or received was going to be tracked as well. And so from part of the sales stack as well is we actually use a tool called Vision. It was previously called iHance. That allows us to track emails. I know there's a lot of different solutions out there on the market right now for that. It basically tracks the open rates and the link clicking inside of an email. But more importantly for us, and it tracks the data. So what it does is it'll actually go into our Office 365 server. So we have everything is cloud-based for us. We don't actually have anything on-prem. With 365, you set up connector and it passes everything through. So without the sales guy having to open up a plugin or do anything, any email he sends from his at National Business Capital email address is passing through that connector, which passes through the system, which assigns the little tracking bit on the actual email. But more importantly, again, it puts it into Salesforce, so we have everything tracked. So this way, as over the life cycle of a deal, any rep or any manager can go into that deal and see any communication that was done on that deal, be it a phone call, email, or text.
That's a Salesforce.com product, right? Or sorry, InsideSales.com product.
That's an InsideSales.com product, yes.
Got it. Very cool. So there's actually writing all that stuff back. You guys use Outlook, but it writes it all back to Salesforce where you can see all that, and that's where you're pulling it from Ambition.
Correct. So anything sent from Salesforce from the object itself would also be in there, but anything sent from the rep's personal, company-provided email outside of Salesforce would also be in there.
Got it. And have you done any crazy filtering or anything on subject lines, or is it just all emails in or out? How are you guys doing that today?
It just functions that if that record is associated with an email address. So if the owner's email, let's say for a merchant that we deal with, if one of the owner's emails is associated with that record, which is if the contact's on that record, and it sees that an email was sent by X rep to that merchant, it'll know that should be associated with that record, and it'll pop it in there. So at any point, if you go into a record that's associated with a contact that has an email address, that matched any of their criteria from that email, it'll show up on the as a related list on a related object.
Got it. Very cool. So new voice media for phones, 8x8 power on the back end of that. Emails with is it iHands?
It's a Vision from
Vision.
Sales.
Got it.
In addition to that, we use DocuSign for e-signature, and we use obviously Ambition for gamification.
Is apps out right here? This top metric we're looking at, is that a DocuSign metric?
So that actually is a timestamp. Yeah, but that's exactly what it is. As soon as DocuSign sends out, it's going to pop off a timestamp in Salesforce that throws that apps out stat up.
Got it. Very cool. So just to kind of tie this all together, Salesforce is kind of the hub. Phone information passed through, email information passed through, DocuSign sends. Anything that works with Salesforce and it applies to the objects on Salesforce, Ambition is picking up and showing to the minute detail all that stuff in real time as you've designed it here, which is kind of what I wanted to shift gears into is like, let's talk about how you built these metrics. You know these better than me, but like we could look at apps out, we could look at any of this stuff, but I'd love for you to take us behind the curtains here and talk about the setup. I think one thing that you did really well and that other folks ask us a lot, I'd love to talk through, is like, how does this stuff actually work? Like, let's go behind the curtains. Everyone says, hey, our app works with all your data. You got 4 or 5 systems plugging into Salesforce here, and I think things work pretty easily, but let's take a look and talk to it from your perspective.
Sure. That was one of the things that was very important for us initially to understand was how Ambition pulls that data and how to best make that data available. And for a lot of our metrics that we had built out, that data didn't exist prior to Ambition, and it was something that we just assumed that was not possible to report on until we found that we could. We just had to figure out how.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these things, so let me just pull up, I think calls inbound is probably a good one to take a look at.
Okay.
So now this is a metric, obviously it's being powered through New Voice Media and it's coming into Salesforce, and that's where the data is kept. The biggest thing I think that for us to understand when it comes to building a metric was that any metric that's going to be pulling from Salesforce needs 2 things. It needs a date and time, and it needs a user, because the user is who's going to be assigned credit, and then the date time is, that's the trigger time of it knows that action happened. So in this case, you can see it's an inbound call. It's coming off the task record. In this case, in New Voice Media, when you make a phone call or receive a phone call, everything becomes a task or activity record. So in this case, it's a task record. It's going to have all the information for that call on that task record as well. So here we can see that the owner of that task record is going to be the user in Salesforce that had made that call. So in this case, we're going to assign that call to the owner of that task record, which is going to be the person who made the call. And then the create date on that task is going to be the start of that call. So we're going to use the start time on that phone call in order to tie in the calls. So now, this is not a time metric. This is just a call unit. We do have a call time metric that is separate. So in this case, we're just doing a count. So we just want to count how many calls that we had. And now on this, it's very important that we only want inbound. We don't want everything. We don't want outbound. We just want inbound. So in this case, we'd have to put in some filters. So the base filter that's usually on everything is the is deleted, just to make sure that if we ever go back in there and remove something, that it's taken care of. But on here, we want to both make sure that it was in fact a call. So in here, we're just going to put in there that a call duration is greater than 0. So that's just telling us that it was a call. It wasn't anything that could have been something else and someone manually put in the task. And then on here, a call type equals inbound. We have options here to be inbound or outbound.
And Ambition pulls all your predefined dispositions, right?
Correct.
Got it.
So it pulled in right from that record, roll the options from that record. So in this case, we can actually take a look and say, all right, well, according to filter logic, anything that meets all of these 3 criteria, it'll increment that count for that owner for that date, whenever the new task is entered for that. And that's how we capture the inbound calls. We do the same thing for outbound, obviously, with a different filter. We also have one that we had broken out for dial lists in particular, because New Voice Media gives us the option of having on the task record, it'll actually have a dial list field so that we know that it came off a dial list, so we can say how many outbound calls a rep had made, how many inbound calls they made, and of the outbound calls, how many of those outbound calls were a dialer. And then the nice thing is in Ambition, we have the ability to have an advanced metric where we can actually go in there and say, all right, now that I know that I have inbound and outbound calls, I also want the total of calls. I can either make another metric in Salesforce to pull it, but in here I can just simply go into and make an advanced metric that's going to be the sum of all the calls. And it basically just takes one metric, which is the calls inbound, adds it to the calls outbound, and from that, you get the calls total.
Nice. So you guys, that's pretty cool. I didn't even know you guys did that. So with that, are you, and I think one thing we'll look at in a minute is kind of like scorecards, but are you caring more about, or it probably is different per role, but do you care about all calls, or do you more care about outbound or inbound, or does it matter for you guys?
We have a number of different roles. We had broken out our sales team. We have both a renewal team and a new team. But inside the new team, we do have a number of different roles. And for each one of those roles, if we have a role that's more of a telemarketer role, we're obviously going to care a lot more about outbound calls, and inbound calls. But we also have a second half of that team is also going to be the inbound, any of the leads that come in. So everything there is really inbound calls. They're not really dialing out as much. So we're going to focus more on the inbound calls. But for our account executive team, it's kind of a mix. They do take calls in from their clients that call in for updates on certain deals or about questions, but they are making a lot of calls out as well. So for them, call total is important for them.
Right. And that's pretty similar to, I think a lot of people that use our product across different industries is like, you got a lead gen team or an SDR team or a BDR team. Outbound is critical for them. You might have an inbound SDR team as well, so you want to measure inbound calls. But for your account executives that are more, pipeline and closing focused, you might not really want to hold them accountable to certain in or out. But it's good to know, okay, of all the inbound and outbound calls you're making, maybe how much are you actually talking on the phone? It's a good leading indicator for account executives, but surely outbound and inbound are more, for your telemarketing roles, like you mentioned. Definitely something you want to hold people accountable to.
Yep, definitely.
That's cool. I didn't know you were using advanced metrics. Anything else Salesforce object-wise with any of your metrics that was unique, and you can be considered, like, again, people are always hesitant about when we say, oh, we can work with any, field or custom or standard, like that's kind of even a unique thing. How hard would you say it was to set this up? Was it pretty straightforward to get in here?
It was very straightforward. It was very easy to use. It was just really, again, it was about making the additional fields and taking the additional metrics that we had previously just left on the table. A lot of things for our sales process mean that's, I guess, a lot of small businesses when they start up is that it's about production, and that you can get the feel for how things are going by just walking around the sales floor, which you can still do now with a company of our size. But we also start looking at data and see what else we can do to tweak a little more out of what we have here, and get a better feel for what everything is. So for us, we started looking at the life cycle of the deal, not just, beginning to end and that's it, because that, in Salesforce, they give you, the create date of that opportunity and the close date, but, that's all you get. How long an opportunity took. If it took a weekend, doesn't matter, but it's kind of fuzzy. So we wanted to get a lot more precise with it. So we started putting in timestamps on different life cycles of that opportunity. One I actually wanted to go over real quick is just for those outbound telemarketers and for the people that are dealing with the inbound calls that we get. One of the biggest things for us, obviously, is sending out our application. We have to send out, that's the very first step in anything we do other than that initial conversation to establish interest, is getting that application out, getting it signed, getting it returned. We use DocuSign for e-signature, as I mentioned, so it's important to us to get that information back, because that's the backbone for a lot of things that we do. So for us, for those outbound reps, the apps out metric that we have here is critical. And what this is basically doing is we do have a button in Salesforce that kicks out a DocuSign document to the primary contact's email address. It gets sent out, it gets tagged in Salesforce so we know that document was sent out, we can see the status of it. But it also taps out a timestamp, as you can see here, on that Salesforce record, so we know when that app was sent out, when that button was hit. And not only that, we can see that who the app was sent out by. That was very important as well to understand, is that we shouldn't always use and rely on the fact that the owner of the record is probably the one that sent it out. In this case, it usually is. In our org, we do pass things along. So we do have, let's say, an inbound rep is the one that had taken the phone call, the initial phone call, got the application sent out, got any of the documentation, the stipulations that needed back in, and then that deal is passed on to another person. It's passed on to an account executive that works that deal, looks at different lenders and see what can get approved. So at that point, the ownership of that record changes, and we wouldn't want to assign that app out timestamp to the account executive if they're not the one that sent out the app. But
Right.
in respect, those account executives also send out applications as well. So it was important that we created a separate field that was going to capture not only the timestamp that action took place, but the user that pressed that button that set that timestamp. So in this case, you can see that we have an app sent user and apps out timestamp. We also have the exact same thing set up for apps in as well. So whenever those documents come back in, the very first thing that happens when it comes back in is that it's going to top off the apps back metric. And it's going to increment, it's going to put a timestamp in there for when we receive the document signed, and we move on to the next step. And so one of the nice things about that is that we have in Ambition, again, you have an advanced metric. And so we actually put in there an app conversion rate. So what we were looking to get here is that if I'm a sales rep and I sent out 10 applications and I got back 5 of them, in a given week, then I'm operating at a 50% conversion rate, which is not bad. But again, in our industry, it's important that we establish that there's going to be interest, that we're going to send out those apps, that we're not just sending it out to anybody, that we can send it out to the people that have interest and we get those back. And then we're on the people that we send them out to get them back in an orderly fashion. And we actually had set up a workflow in our org so that after a set period of time, if an opportunity is open too long that stays in just the apps out phase, it's setting off a lot of SLAs, setting off alerts to the management team so that they can take a look at that particular deal. And if it's not worked in a set time period, it'll actually expire the opportunity and close it out, which will go to a secondary team that specializes in following up with those people to see if they can get the documents back in. So on here, this advanced metric for the app conversion rate, you can see we're just comparing the apps out and package deals, and it's really as simple as just taking in both metrics and saying, let's say, take apps back divided by apps out. So if we had, if we got 5 back divided by 10, so that's 5 out of 10, which is going to be a 0.5. And then all you have to do is you just give it a multiplier of 100. And if you weren't sure about that, you can go right here on the help, and it'll tell you that usually if you want to convert it with decimal into percentages, you just use 100. So you put 100 there. If you want, as I had done here, you can just put a minimum and a maximum just to make sure there's nothing, nothing too crazy, so that if an app came in at the end of the week and we're looking at one particular week and one number was a little bit higher than the other, that, if apps back was higher than apps out, we wouldn't want to be at, 120%. Still want to show it as just, topping out at 100%. So we put that little cap in there as well, save that, and that's up and running now so that we can actually see on a leaderboard at any time, we can see what the conversion rates are for reps, and that's yet another thing that we can put on the TVs and yet another thing we can base the challenges off of.
That's very cool. A lot of unique little tidbits. I want to unpack a few of them. We don't have to go back to it, but back in that metric screen, you had that custom user field and that custom date. Was that unique to, because I know that DocuSign and almost every other third-party solution has their own. Was that theirs, or did you make your own custom user field and date?
That's our own custom. That was built in. We had built into the actual DocuSign button that it generates that field.
Yeah, and that's a pretty easy process. People ask us all the time, like, hey, can you guys measure blah? Like, blah can be anything. And ultimately the answer is yes, if you can tie it to a user field and tie it to a specific date. And that's what you did there. You basically said, hey, we want to know when apps are sent and back and yada, yada, yada. And as long as we can tie it, like you said, it's not unique to the modification stamp. It's not unique to the owner of the opportunity. It's unique to the role, the person's job who actually sent the app on that opportunity. So that does require a unique date field and user field. So that's it's pretty cool. I'm glad you showed that. This screen, and you've got some really cool conversion metrics. Basically, I just want to hit on this for other folks watching this. Another common instance of this, and this is a really good one because it's a good conversion rate, would be like for SDRs, like outbound phone calls to demos scheduled. That's a great conversion rate to show effectiveness. Another one, because outbound like SDRs, their job is to set demos for their account executive, would be on the left side, okay, demos set divided by demos held. And that's a great secondary conversion metric to see, okay, how are their calls converting to sets? How are those sets holding up? And that's a really important metric for kind of that front end sales development rep. So a lot of cool stuff here. I love that you guys are doing app conversion rate. So thanks for showing this. Anything else you want to show on the metrics or fields or objects? I just want to hit on those two things as you kind of walk through that metric and this conversion metric.
No, I think that's fine. Yeah, as far as the fields that we had talked about, building them out as far as getting the timestamps and the users weren't that difficult at all. I mean, between workflows and the process builder in Salesforce, you can accomplish 99% of them. Some of the more complex ones, which I haven't touched on, but those do require some Apex coding, depending on how your process is and how your stack goes with Salesforce and what's available to you. We just have some unique scenarios for some other side things that did require some additional coding.
But once it's built in Salesforce, it's measurable as a metric within our UI, pulled in automatically.
Absolutely.
Cool. So from here, I mean, we can do whatever, but I think it makes sense. Tell us about these roles. So we know we have an outbound telemarketer. We know there's some sort of closer. I know there's maybe a renewals or other group. But tell us about these groups, and then we'll jump into how these metrics are applied to their unique scorecards.
All right, sure. So again, it's really the understanding of the scorecards and how they work, but you want to tie in certain metrics and certain goals for those metrics on a daily and monthly basis based on their role. So for us, it was kind of figuring out what the different roles were. And then what groups needed to kind of exist in order to contain all those. And then in some cases, some groups were going to contain other groups. So we had kind of experimented with a few setups, and this was the best role that we came up with. So you can see here that for everything that's in Ambition right now are our three sales-facing really departments. We have our business development team, we have our new sales team, and we have a retention sales team. Inside of that, we have minor departments. And now you can see here that the new sales AE and the new sales RDE minor departments are there. And you can see that there isn't that breakout for retention sales yet. That's still to come. But that was just a separation we needed because in this case, these are the account executives and these are the relationship development experts for the outbound team, the people that are doing more of the outbound dialing. So both of those different people are going to have different metrics that they're going to, be held accountable to. Or when we do competitions, we're going to want to see data differently. Or in some cases, if we want to see if we have something on the TVs that's going to be a company-wide goal or a department goal, we want to have the flexibility to say, hey, there's going to be a goal that's going to be a new sales goal or a retention sales goal, or in some cases, a company goal. But we want to be able to break it out as best we can. And then aside from that, we have the broken out roles as well. So we do have the retention sales AEs, RDs here, and we have the RDEs, again, are broken down a second time to be inbound and outbound because they have a sub-department within that original sub-department. So it breaks down a little bit more.
I want to expand upon that real quick. So you guys are obviously a sophisticated sales org. There's all kinds of departments and different sales structures and could be daily sales cycles, could be 18-month, selling medical sales equipment, whatever. Basically, this is where you say, okay, this is what Sally Jones does. She's on the front end. This is what Mike Brown does. He's on the back end. This allows you to build very explicit and descriptive roles around what requirements someone would have to be successful in a job. And you guys have a lot of unique ones. And I think that the cool thing next is, and you mentioned this, is how it applies to scorecards. So roles for everybody don't always mean the same for scorecards, but in Ambition, you will apply a scorecard to a role and how you think about what success looks like there. So give us a spin on how you've got these people grouped into these different roles. Now show us how I guess we picked one here, new sales as RDE. What does success look like for an RDE, and how do you think about these two scorecards here?
Sure. So for a new sales RDE outbound, that's basically a telemarketer. That's someone that's making a large amount of outbound calls. They're spending the majority of their day making those outbound calls, trying to establish those relationships and sending out those applications. For some part of the day, they are focusing on following up with people that they had reached out to in the past day or so or week or so that had asked them to call them back another day, or they're reaching out to a lot of new people as well. The outbound team specifically doesn't really deal with any inbound calls. Any of the inbound calls that come in get rotated through the account executives or the inbound RDE team. depending on the size of the deal that they're looking for. So the outbound people are more specifically focused on just outbound calls. But the method that we have used for them, I mean, we do send, in addition to calling people, we do occasionally, we'll send a text message to follow up or an email to follow up. So it was important for us to track that as well.
Yep.
And now, one thing I wanted to show is that when I first started and I first introduced this to the CEO and to the sales manager, and I was showing them the scorecards and what it was about, the first thing that my sales manager said, like, all right, well, I want everyone should be making, they should be on the phone for 8 hours a day. Like, all right, the sales guy, they're coming in, they're working 8 hours, but, it's not feasible to be on the phone for 8 hours. They're not, it's when you come in, you're not putting on into a dial tone and just, waiting for the calls to come in. In our systems, we have numerous lists. They go back and forth. We're not on we prefer not to use a power dialer where it's dialing constantly, or it's dialing many more people than would have been able to answer. Just because we don't want to annoy people. We want to get their business and have a nice relationship with them. So a lot of the dialers that we have are, if it's one rep, it's one call at a time. And it's an automated system to make that as quick as possible, but also keep that courtesy there. So it was important that we first set out we really didn't have anything really set out. Where kind of the metrics were kind of big, wishy-washy. We kind of throw in there. We say, yeah, sure, I'll put on there that it's going to be 8 hours of talk time in a day. But as soon as the data starts coming in, you start looking at those dashboards, looking at those reports, you quickly realize that no one's hitting that score at all or coming even close. And that's the best way that you can go in there and start adjusting your metrics. And it was important for us, for my sales manager and for my CEO, for them to understand that you have, in Ambition, you have two scores. You have your activity score and your objective score, being that the activity score is what you did that day. What you did that, and on a scorecard especially, is what at the end of the day would say that I had a good day, that I did all I could do today. And then the metrics are the end of the month. How do I know if I had a good or a bad month? That's the data that's going to be showing there. And for each different role, it's going to be a different set of variables and different set of metrics. So it was important for us to figure out what was going to be good. And again, we had gone through phases of the sales manager saying, all right, if it's not 8 hours, I want it to be 6 hours, but I want it to be 50 emails, 50 text messages, 10 apps out or 15 apps out a day. And again, I had said, we have some data now. We have 1 or 2 months of data. Let's take a look. How many apps are sent out on average, or who would you say is the best, outbound RD we have? Let me see what he sent out in a week or a month. And you'd say, all right, well, you don't want to set Ambition to be, the top. You don't want to say, this is what our top guy does. You want to say, this is what you should be doing today. If you don't get there, then you didn't do your job today. And that's one of the big things when it comes to activity score and outbound and the objective score is the dashboards. And I just want to switch over real quick to that. Let me just I'll pop into one of the sales guys real quick just to see. Here's one of our outbound RDEs.
All right, Robert, you're the star.
Yep. All right, so here we can take a look. And now you can see the color of the bars, obviously, and you can see anything in red is obviously it needs focus. Anything in orange is getting there. Anything in green, you're good. And so in this case, we had told all of the sales team, and I instructed the manager, and that's, at the end of the day, the manager can see this dashboard and the user sees it. They see it on their sidebar in Salesforce. They can go into Ambition, they can see it, and they'll definitely notice that metric and those colors. And it's, hey, if you don't make your calls through the day, or if all those bars aren't green, why are you cutting out at 5 o'clock? Why don't you say later? Why don't you, take some calls on the West Coast and try to make up those bars? And that was telling them, what activity you're doing, throughout that day. Because if you can get there on those bars, when it comes down to the objectives, you should meet it. And we actually had run into a scenario where I actually had an employee that had been with us, I think about 8 or 7 years, that had come to me with an issue, and they said that they've been working hard, but they weren't really getting much. They weren't seeing the deals that they used to see. And it had become a big issue for the sales management team and for the CEO as well, because it was a close friend that was having issues with this. And one of the really cool things that we had found with Ambition was when we were looking at the productivity quadrants, which compare activity score to objective score, is that you can go in there and you can see, based on the quadrant and the position in the quadrant, who's performing and who's not. And let me actually pull it up just to give you a good idea on that. So in this case, without going into too much, without shaming too many people, so now this is just looking at the current month right now. But on here, you have the ability of showing outliers. And here you can actually see as people progress. So the further the right they are, the more they're doing during the day. And the higher up they are is the more they're getting out of it. So if somebody is further right, I don't want to click on it to show you who it is, but you could. And
but basically, these are people that are they're getting after it. They're both very active, so they're working the higher funnel metrics, and that's leading to results. So that's why those two scores exist. These people right here are working the system, and it's working for them.
Yep.
So what happened with your rep that was there for 7 or 8 years? Did you pull this up and activity was down? What was the situation?
So in that case, it was much like this outlier over here, is that they were doing a lot of activity. They were doing a lot of calls, and they were sending a lot of emails, sending a lot of texts, but they weren't getting much out of it. The objective was down. And I had told the sales manager at the time that the quadrant is a great tool, because it's anything that's an outlier is a red flag. And anything has an explanation on there. And if you have somebody like he did, where it's somebody that was doing a lot of work but not getting a lot out of it, it's saying, right, well, whatever they're doing in their approach may not be optimal. Maybe you should listen to some of the call recordings that we have for them, or maybe you should take a look at some of the emails they were sending out. And what it ended up being was that rep was sending out a lot of mass mail. And because they were sending out a lot of mass mail, it was augmenting their score, and that they were getting a high amount of points because they were sending so many emails that it was kind of offsetting their objective score.
Not personalized.
Yeah, not because it was not personalized. They're not getting a lot of read rates. They weren't getting a lot of feedback from it. When they were making calls, some of the calls were not optimal. Some of the things they were saying, they weren't, in a positive spin to things. So there are a lot of changes to maybe made. But if he was in the middle of the pack, he wouldn't have, it wouldn't have popped out as obviously. But right. A tool like this really shines lights on those individuals, and it allows the sales manager, instead of having to, equally, give his focus to, a team of 100 people, he can pick out the people that really need him and work on them first to try to get them back on track and get them back to moving. And a tool like this is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I always like to say, the quadrant allows you in real time to spot, sparks before they become fires. So you don't have to wait to the end of the month to see that someone didn't hit their MRR number, their revenue number, their closed one. You can pretty quickly in any hour of the day see if they're in an outlier on that quadrant, and quickly make, fast changes with him or her, no matter the job. You just easily look at activity, easily look at attainment, and have a very easy conversation. And people I've found, and I'd love to hear your feedback, are pretty receptive to that, because you're not looking in the rearview mirror. It's all real time. There's no, I don't want to say excuses, but it's very much this is black and white. What do we need to do really quickly? So I assume you guys have had that experience. I know we definitely do internally at Ambition.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our sales team has always been very, very open to change, and we've lucked out from a technology point of view, is that we can give them some pretty new stuff, and they're pretty open and receptive to it. But they love, we have since New York Media has the call recording, we can pull call recordings. So we have our sales team, our sales management team has a huge library of both good and bad calls that they can bring up examples for. If you have a rep that has a particular issue on a call, they can annotate that call on different timestamps, and they can coach that rep on how, what they can do better next time. It's very important for that. One of the things I actually wanted to go over on the scorecards also was that we have the difference between the activity and the objectives is when you can see one without the other. And that was a lot of my sales management when I had actually met with them to go over setting these metrics and these goals and point values, was they were looking for guidance from me on, what their process was. And I had no idea, how many deals a sales guy should make in a day. I'm not a salesperson. I didn't know what was capable of, and I thought that they would be. So I had kind of taken that approach, like I said, of shooting for the moon. What do you think is ideal? And then using the data to back it up. And at the end of the day, if you set up a bunch of activities And, if you go back and look in that month and you say, all right, everyone that left yesterday left fully green. They had, a 100 or greater on the activity score, but we really didn't fund that many deals today, or we didn't really send out that many apps, then something is wrong. And then something is off on the objectives. Something is off on the activities that you're not accomplishing what your goals are. It could be that your goals are wrong, or it could be that your approach is wrong. So I think it shines a light, Ambition as a whole, when it comes to all the metric tracking, it shines a light on the process and trying to, investigate the process and see what you can do to improve that process to get, again, both the activity scores, the objective scores, and, the end result all to be, 100 out of 100.
Sure. We're pretty nerdy here. I like to describe this as the scientific method. Like, okay, we have a hypothesis that these 5 people in this selling job can do X at the end of the month, revenue or meetings or whatever. And we believe these are the things they'll need to do to get there. This is exactly a system to set up. Okay, do these things, and we believe achieving this results. But if you don't, you should be agile and quick to change. And you may know this, but scroll down there just a hair. Ambition will help you. So if you, let's say, going back up to his, you can do it on objectives here. Hit view analytics there, or view it on the top. So if you're not sure, you might have a hypothesis to say, we need 20 phone calls and 2 hours of talk time and 10 meetings to get closed one of 10K or whatever. Is that working for you? Is it popping down, the view analytics? It should pop down for you there. I'm not sure why it wasn't. Hit it on activities real fast. Have you ever used this feature?
I had looked at it, I think, earlier, but I think I had just gotten so used to having meetings with my my sales team that I had stopped looking at that particular data.
It's weird it's not popping down. I'm not sure why that's it. So we'll skip that.
Also highlight the fact that one of my favorite features about Ambition is the fact that it's so easy to get help when you need it.
That's true. Boom. You'd be chatting us in seconds.
Yep, and that's one of my favorite things about any vendor that we deal with. That's something we insist on with every vendor, is that we have that relationship, that we can not only help build the product around us and around our needs, but also when we do have issues, that we have responses that are quick and timely, that are not dismissive. And I mean, there's been a lot of changes to Ambition since we started, but there's still many changes down the pipeline. We still have many changes in our org that we're working on using Ambition even more for. So I think that was one of the key things for us, was having that open communication channel and the ease of that communication. So if you run into an issue like this, that it's really quickly, you can just go on there and say, hey, I'm having an issue with the view analytics button, and you'd have the engineering staff on it right away.
Yeah, which of course we always, that pumps right into our Slack channel. So someone's on that in seconds, and we try to be pretty quick on that. And let's check this out after this call, because this is cool, and I just want to tell everybody what this does. When you hit that button, given the hypothesis there, it's actually going to say, and you said it in your own words earlier, you don't want to benchmark everybody at what the best person's doing. You want it to be attainable. And what that view analytics will do is it'll actually take that role and it'll benchmark people at the 80th percentile of what your best people do. So we'll actually give recommendations of, hey, rather than that 20 benchmark on calls, we really think it should be 25 or 35. And if we believe the team can do it, and if you put that out in front of them, we believe they're more likely to hit this objective that you've put down here in funded volume, for example. So it's kind of a crutch, if you will, to test your hypothesis before going live with it. I hate that it didn't pull down there, but definitely take it out after.
I remember now why what had happened for us was anytime we were adding any of these metrics, most of these metrics didn't exist prior, and that we had added it specifically so that we can add it to the scorecard and Ambition. So at that point, there was no data to go off of.
That's probably what it was.
When we ever looked at the analytics, there wasn't any data to go off of.
Yeah, because what it does is it pulls in 30 days to show you a real bell curve of real data. So if it's all new metrics, it's hard to do that. The last thing I'll show before I'll let you jump here. Clearly, calls are important, right? You've got talk time benchmark. What is that, 90 minutes? So we got 5,400 seconds. I think we probably visualize that for you minutes and hours, but in the scorecard, it goes off of the timestamp in Salesforce, so it's counting seconds. So that's 90 minutes, right? You want 90 minutes of talk time, 50 phone calls, and that makes up 90% of the score. So that's another unique thing Ambition can do is every sales leader out there knows that hey, I value emails, but picking up the phone is way more important. So clearly that is the case with you guys. You're giving 90% of the score here to just call activity, time, and number. And then emails, they're important, and text looks like as well, but not as important as talking to people.
Yeah, and that's the difference. You can see here, this is the account executive. This is somebody that's going to be working a deal at more of the end stages. So in this case, we are focusing on like the total amount of calls, not just outbound calls. So we're looking at inbound calls, outbound calls as well. But it's, again, heavily weighted to calls because of the value of speaking to a client rather than just simply sending out an email. Partially because of the way that we have our marketing platform set up, we actually use a tool, Conversica. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but they do automated follow-up. And so we have a lot of triggers in our system so that when we send out documents, if we're waiting for a response, there's automatic touches that go out to that person looking for follow-ups. So it doesn't require our staff to do as much chasing down of paperwork. And it uses a lot of AI tools to communicate with the clients and get the data that we need back. So, and that's why in our cases, emails and text messages, while we still want to track them to give credit to the employees that do follow up, we don't value as much for an account executive as we do for call time. And
right.
Switch over to, let's say we had talked about the outbound RDEs. You can see here that now we have talk time total, completely is one of the highest valued metrics, but calls outbound as well in there as well. So calls make up 70% of the score, just on the phone, but just because that basically is their job. And apps out to us, it's an activity because it's what they did during that day. And you can see here, we're looking for a outbound RD to send out at least 5 apps a day in order to have that data complete. We've had days where, reps and sent out 20 or more in a day, and some when they sent out 3. But it's important to get, a feel for what you'd expect an actual rep to get. And again, that comes down to we talk about that conversion ratio as well, to keep that up as well. And you can see here the SMSs and the emails as well. And in this case, the activity would be the sending out of the app, but the objective is getting the app back.
Right.
That's essentially when the job not necessarily is complete for the RD, for the outbound RD, but it's getting very close. It's basically 80% job done, because at that point, that was the big hurdle, is getting the first piece of data back from the merchant. And at that point, then they're looking for any follow-up documentation that they need as far as bank statements or any of those stipulations that they come in before that relationship is handed over. And we actually have what we call a package alley-oop, is when an RD passes off a deal from their stage over to the account executives. So that's a big outbound metric for a big objective metric for those RDEs. And that's actually what we use triggers for on the TVs for the RDs, so that they get, instead of just funding a deal, we also have triggers to go off from wherever those package alley-oops, because according, along with, how important it is to fund a deal, it also is important that's basically the RD's funding of a deal is passing on that package. So it's important to highlight that as well.
Got to celebrate their wins. Mm-hmm. So I was excited to do this with you. I've taken a bunch of your time, and hopefully you don't have a hard stop, but a big thing I wanted to do with you is talk about setup and how we work with stuff, because you're, one of the best there is in being a super admin on Ambition. So this has been awesome. We spent a lot of time behind the curtains. We know a lot about your roles and how these scorecards work. Show us. So we haven't spent any of the fun stuff yet. Like, we haven't talked too much about contests. We looked at a dashboard for a second, but we've got leaderboards, we've got Quadrant, we've got contests, we've got TVs. We don't need to hit on all that. But give us some understanding of how your reps are using this, how your managers are either using goals or contests to drive behavior. And I know I've been in your office, TVs are everywhere. So Run us through whatever you want to show and any of those things. I'm not sure if anything's live right now, but tell us a little bit about, so you've got this machine, it's well-oiled, you've got your roles built, people know what they're buying into the system, I think. Tell us how they're engaging with it, how your managers are using it, and what the results have been.
Sure. One of the big focuses that we had gotten Ambition for was reporting, and it was key to our management team. They had previously been using some Salesforce reports and dashboards, but they're a little bit hard for them to use. And because of a lot of the permissions that we had set up on the profiles, they weren't able to view everything that they wanted to view.
We'll do a small timeout.
Yeah.
You just said something that's one of the biggest questions we get asked is, why is this different than Salesforce dashboards? I think what you said is important, but tell anyone watching this, why is Ambition different than Salesforce dashboards, in your opinion?
So for us, it's on the eye. It's so much easier to look at Ambition data, and it gets you what you want as quick as you want it with the filters that you can. Whereas Salesforce gives you 1,000 options to filter your data and to pull in different columns. A lot of that stuff is almost like in a different language to any of the sales manager doesn't have a tech background. So they might not know what a particular field means. Versus in Ambition, we can name it and have a description on it that is very clear, so they can see it, they understand what it means, and they can pull just what they want and not be presented with 1,000 options that don't meet their requirements. And
Perfect.
with when we in our Salesforce org, we don't use Lightning, we use Classic. And because of that, our dashboards are kind of limited. We can only have 3 columns on that dashboard. So it's going to show us only a limited amount of information. But with Ambition, you have the different spreadsheets views, the reporting views, that you can get a lot of that information all on one screen and get it in the view that you definitely want to see it in. So our sales management team definitely utilizes that a lot.
And would you say people, the reps, obviously managers use them, but are the reps, are they checking in? And right now we're looking at Ambition unique to, our URL, but you may pull up, do people use it in Salesforce as well? That's another big thing is like, well, I want people to stay in Salesforce. Are reps checking these dashboards, and are they checking them in Salesforce on the TV or the Ambition, platform website?
Every single one of them. So on Salesforce itself, when our reps go in, that's their home screen is actually the Ambition screens. That's the first thing they see in the morning is the bunch of zeros on the dashboard to remind them that they got some work to do. So they'll get on those right away. And then when they come back from lunch, it's one of the first things they see when they log in is going to be that home screen with those dashboards. And if those lines aren't at about 50%, they know they got to catch up on stuff. And it also reminds them that if they see that let's say their calls are in the green and they're doing well on the calls, then maybe they shoot out a few text messages and follow up on some deals to pull up the other categories as well.
After lunch, if you're less than 50%, it's pretty easy. We've all been through grade school. You're less than half of the way there, and you're halfway through the day. So, ease of use, I think, is the big thing.
Yeah. So aside from just having it as the home screen, the full page app, we do have whenever they go off that page onto the object views to look at different opportunities. It is in the sidebar, so we have the small widget there that just shows you a little quick snapshot of all their bars. They can click on it to get the more detailed view. They have the option switching over to Ambition in Salesforce, so they can open up Salesforce as well in the second window. Our management team usually has the sales management team in particular, they'll have Salesforce as a window open. Some of our sales managers actually have a monitor that they keep separately, that they have their own screen that just runs just for them, just so that they have a TV view on a small monitor right next to them with just the data that they want, because they want that real-time data without having to refresh.
That's awesome. I think you guys also do like some power hours. Do you have anything live right now? Any goals or any contests you could give us a quick glance at?
Nothing currently. We usually at the end of the month, that's usually when they all pile in. A lot of the times we had empowered a lot of our sales managers to create their own challenges and contests. So there's some unique ones that usually come across that they have a lot of challenges, being sales guys. But the nice thing about having all the different departments on there is that when you have all your scorecards set up correctly and you get everything fine-tuned, you can pit, the business development department against the outbound RDEs. And granted, they're completely 2 different departments. One's looking for, strategic partners, and the other one's looking for clients. So traditionally, you wouldn't be able to match them up because you would never find any kind of similarity between them. But Ambition gives you that activity score and that objective score that don't necessarily tie to anything specific. So you can say, hey, did you accomplish your mission today? And that basically means that you hit 100 on your activity score. So if the entire biz dev team hit 100, but only half the new sales team, then you can obviously tell who the winner was for that day. So that gave us the ability to have challenges across different departments. And I think that was something we're looking forward to doing, and we're expanding out to more departments in our organization to give them all that ability to track. And it's just right now, it's a matter of time of figuring out, adding additional fields, figuring out some logic and some projects to get that in there and that data accounted for.
Right. And I always like to say it's like a linebacker or a quarterback in fantasy football or a golf handicap score. Like it it's pretty impossible for most salespeople just have an Excel spreadsheet and they're running a contest. It's like, hey, whoever did the most revenue wins. And that's not a lot of fun. But when you can say, hey, RDE versus account executive versus AM, whoever meets their goals, so either on activity or objective, to the most degree or more, hey, you now have a level playing field against each other. And that's pretty cool. So you guys have a bunch of TVs. I think that's where you're driving to.
Yeah.
Tell us about your TVs and maybe show us one that you feel comfortable showing, and we'll check it out.
Okay. So I had mentioned earlier that we had started with about 4 TVs on the sales side. On the sales side right now, I think we're at, I don't know, about 12 TVs. So we actually have about 8 overhead TVs. We have an additional 2 TVs up in the front that are on one wall that give us kind of a summary screens. And then we have, some screens around that are, we call them company screens. So you
actually had being a web developer back in the day, I learned some stuff from you. You had like local weather, like a custom countdown clock. That was pretty cool. Like I learned that from you. I didn't even know that existed. So sorry to cut you off, but I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah. So I'll show you real quick. This is our company count, one of our company screens. So the way this was set up is that we have 2 large TVs on either side of our office. Our office is physically split in half because we have a production team that actually assists our sales team as well. But obviously we keep them separate from the sales team just for a noise benefit. But we do like to share the information back and forth. So for these screens, it was a lot more generic information, a lot more company information. So in this case, these slides are all set up, and because of the large amount of options you have when it comes now to setting up a board, I mean, from setting up just the metric leaderboards, but also adding in the multimedia, the challenges, or any specific messages on there. So you can see that one of the first slides that we have is the funding days remaining. And for us, obviously, as most businesses are, the month is important to us, is that at the end of the month, we're usually a lot busier. And when it comes to the end of the month, there's goals associated with that. It gets busy, there's challenges. So we like to keep update of, when it is, when that date, the month end is coming. So for us, it was very important to get that up. And let me see if I can pull it up real quick without going too crazy.
17.
Yeah, so you can see here, it says 17 monthly funding days remaining. So there's obviously a countdown there. This is all, again, my web background coding. We had it code so that it's taking out non-business days, so we don't get too mixed up there.
But that's easy. That's like a web page anybody can go to and just say, hey, show me business days left this month, right? Like anybody could plug in that URL and it'll just show right here on the screen, won't it?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that is it's a custom URL that we have on our web server. So it's ours, but there's nothing stopping somebody else from using it. It's not really sensitive information. It was just a quick means to an end just to get those monthly funding days. But occasionally we do monthly, the sales team does daily huddles where they meet, and then we do company huddles every now and then, but that's always a number that everyone always points out to, is just to remind everybody how many days are left. So we know, that the end is coming, we need to focus, and we need to get those deals done. The next slide I don't want to go into, but is the funding goal, and that's just simply tracking that goal. So we have our goals that we send out for the year to, our yearly funding goals for a company. And that's basically just going to look at that funding dollar amount that we do, and just tracking that over time and then the year, and then it gives you a nice graph of how we're progressing towards that goal and see what kind of trending we are having, and then you can see how some months are a lot busier than others.
Right.
So it's nice to put it on that company screen. So again, both sides can revel in how we're doing as a company. Some of the other things that I found were really neat to put on to the company one is quotes. Is that occasionally, the company is run from, we had done recently was Delivering Happiness, which is a motivational session that they had come from almost a few days. The entire company was involved. They're doing very motivational stuff, very positive stuff that we're going through. And with that comes a lot of quotes that came across that we wanted to show off, if a particular sales agent or one of the employees here has a quote that they like, they usually send it into the IT team, and we'll occasionally feature them on these screens. So we'll swap out these quotes. And you can see here we have 2 of them. We go back and forth, and we kind of, pass around just to see and change them up every now and then to show everybody what's going on with the with people's interests and if there's any interesting quotes that they found.
That's awesome.
One of the next things I'll show you on here is that we actually, with that Delivering Happiness team, one of the things we had established was that we wanted to find a way to highlight any employees that do a great job internally if they had done something that was spectacular, if they'd done something that would not just do their job, but do their job exceptionally well, or do something that was very nice for somebody else. And what we do is we hand out these wow cards, these cards that just tell someone that you acknowledge or something that you did, and they include a personalized note of what had happened. But that recognition is then emailed, the entire company knows about it. But we do have contests every month where everyone that had gotten the wow cards, they pool together and we do a raffle, and whoever wins that raffle becomes the wow ambassador for the month, and they get featured. So whenever a rep is featured, we take their picture.
Nice.
So you can hear that we always throw their picture in there, and that's obviously utilizing the multimedia tab on the screen. So you can see there that's one of our business development reps who had won the wow ambassador for May.
This is one of the cool culture things you all do. It doesn't have to just be metrics or funding. You show weather, show wow reports, show quotes. I think that's great, and I think you guys have some of the better TVs I've seen, on a sales floor. Yeah, sorry to cut you off. That wow thing's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, and then we have again, I was talking about you had mentioned the weather. Is that everyone is always constantly, granted we have a lot of windows here, but everyone's very curious about what's going on with the day. One of the websites I like to use all the time is Dark Sky, and they use forecast.io, I believe, is their back end. But it gives you a nice timeline of the day and then a map of the U.S. to give you, a good idea of what's going on. So that was just as simple as loading in our address, into the, their website, and then taking the resulting URL and putting it in a multimedia window.
They're literally saying, all right, call this weather, copy paste this web link, put it in this ambition screen. And at all times, when this rotation comes in, we're showing your weather for as long as you want to see. Pretty easy.
Yep.
And I've never seen that done other than your office. So I think we put that in the best practice playbook because of you guys. Is hey, here's the funding days days left this month. Here's a weather thing. I learned a lot on that trip. So that was all you, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's going through those, and you can see here, if I'll pull up real quick that weather slide, you can see here that it's pulling in basically the coordinates of our office.
Oh, that's cool.
In their URL, and then that allows us to display in that slide whatever we wanted to show. And then we obviously put timings and stuff like that on those different boards. And now, along with those boards, we do have some other ones here. I'll show you just real quick, just going through them. You can see here that our sales one, we have the new sales AE, new sales RDE, and then you have a new sales AE summary and a new sales RDE summary. And then there's the WT is with trigger and the WOT is without trigger. So this was a combination that was kind of an out of necessity, is that we have our office here, but we have many TVs, about 12 of them on the sales side, and we also have remote offices. So we have an office that we actually have in Florida, and we had one in South Carolina as well. But those offices were set up, but in some cases, in some scenarios, we wouldn't want triggers going off on those TVs. So our setups for our TVs here, we do use Mac Minis as the client. We had used, at one point, we had tried using Chromebits as well for some TVs. It just, we kind of changed back and forth. So in a lot of cases, we'll have a Mac Mini that's presenting two different ambition boards, and it's setting out to an HDMI splitter that's setting it out to a few different TVs throughout the building. So when we have on the sales side, the TVs that are hanging from the ceiling, they're all showing the new sales AE for the AE side and new sales RD for the RD side. So it's split 50-50, 4 TVs on each side that are showing up for those groups. So that's, the room is split, so it makes sense the TVs are split. And then when it comes down to the AE summary and the RD summary, those are the boards that are then, you can see here that they're playing with the triggers on here. So there's 12 triggers on the AE summary and there's 24 on the RD.
Some people might not know what triggers are. So slides or content. We looked at that, weather, funding days. Tell us, what triggers are in your words and why they're important.
So triggers are basically what is going to trigger off an audio and visual reward essentially for that rep. So once that action takes place, once that metric is incremented, it'll automatically change the slide. It'll put in the next slide as being a little bomb, which is nice for them to see coming up. And then it'll play whatever their anthem is that they picked. So it'll play a YouTube clip of whatever they selected. And some of the guys have gone as far as uploading their own YouTube clips just to have as an anthem. But in those cases, I mean, you can see here the difference between the AE summary and the RDE summary is that there's obviously double the amount of triggers for an RDE. And why that is because, as we talked about before, AEs, they have triggers for whenever something is funded. So when that deal is closed. But an RDE actually has two. And RDEs, their funding essentially is the package alley-oop when they pass that deal over. But they also do like to see when a deal funds that they were the RDE for. Just they saw how that deal went over, and we want to congratulate them for that as well. So we have those RDE funding metrics are actually, and there's a separate metric that aren't looking at the opportunity owner, but instead the RDE field, which was populated when the deal was pushed over from RDE to AE.
That's cool. Do you mind click one of your TVs? There's a little Easter egg hiding here. We can show folks that are watching this like what that looks like. It'll show one of our custom ones. So any TV you want to pick, we could just show one. So basically, you say, hey, we care about how many phone calls you make. When you make 50, we want to celebrate that. Or when you fund a deal, we want to celebrate that. So you can double click that clock there. It'll issue that bomb, and you can click it. It'll probably be our custom demo user, Susan. So here's an example of a trigger. It may play audio on your side. I don't know if it'll play for everybody. But there's that YouTube video. So it's pretty awesome that your reps are making their own YouTube videos and uploading them as their triggers. We've got a lot of cool stories of people doing funny things like that, as well as like theming days, like Big Hit Mondays or like Disco Tuesdays. So people have a lot of fun with triggers, but wanted to make sure people knew exactly what you meant by that. So thanks for showing that.
No problem. And then one of the things that we had done with these triggers, we actually had it set up this way. I'm not sure how many other people have it set up. It's a little weird just because the way that's named, it's in a different sort. But we wanted to not only capture when a deal, in this case, a deal was moved from one rep to another, but how many they did this week. So that's how these triggers are all set up, is to actually see how many packages were sent over. So the first time this metric gets incremented, it'll actually say, all right, well, if this is the first time, it's going to say this is the first package alley-oop they had this week. But the next one that they do, it's going to say, hey, this is the second. So we know that if it goes off and everyone's looking at the screen, we don't have to ask how many deals that they actually did this week. We know by.
Oh, that's cool. I don't think anybody's ever done it that way. So basically you're saying, is it greater than or equal to 2 or less than or equal to 2? Or what are you doing there? Greater than 1? I got you.
It's greater, yeah. So it's greater than 1, and just because the way the triggers work, that it works that way. And then when you go into the third, let me pull up the third. I think this should be greater than 2. So if it's greater than 2, it's going to show the third. And it's basically, once it gets triggered for that week, just because it's the time frame in the week, it's not going to get triggered again for that user. So you don't have to do greater or equal to, it won't trigger again. Even though the fourth, let's say they do 4 deals and they do another deal, which is going to be the 5th deal, it's not going to trigger the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th because they've already been triggered for that week. And because they've been triggered, it's not going to re-trigger. So because of that logic, it allows us to just use this simple logic setup so that we can just have it, go off and then show, how many they're up to for that week.
That's pretty cool. And I like the way your brain works. I'll show you something though. We'll learn something here. Keep going down. You should be able to do metric type equals, I think it's a count. So record, and you can say like, so you can actually build in a custom, like you can actually make a new metric here. So you could say this, like whatever it is, app funded. You can build a metric here unique to this trigger. So have you ever done that by chance? This is something else. You could say equals 4, equals 5. So what you're doing absolutely works, but you could actually build in, kind of like we looked at metrics earlier with all your custom logic. You can make a record-based one, or you could say if a deal was greater than 100,000 in funding. So you can be pretty explicit on some triggers too. So poke around with that. You might find that you might create some new triggers that you didn't have before.
Yeah. And one of the next features that I saw that you had added recently, or pretty recently, was the ability to have one trigger on multiple TVs. So in our cases where we had, for each type of trigger, we had to make 12. Mm-hmm. Now we don't have to make 12, 14 times. We can just make it once and then assign out those particular triggers to more than one TV.
Yeah.
In our case, like I had said, that because of the way that we have our TV set up in the different locales that we have, in some cases we want to have that same screen show, but we don't want to have the triggers because we don't want to have the noise going off for some things, but other things we do. So in that case, we were able to easily, with the duplicate button here, duplicate an existing slideshow that we had made, but then just take off the triggers so that it wasn't distracting to those individuals that didn't want to hear those triggers for that particular workspace. And then, as I had gone over what we have here, like the different teams, we have the BizDev team. This is actually one of the executive summaries. So in that case, it's different data that would be showing for any team, but it'd be more of a summary. This is actually for our COO, is that they wanted to see the activity on the sales side, but they also wanted to see a lot more of the dollars and the values that wouldn't necessarily mean too much to our sales employees, but means a lot to the COO. So they were able to do a lot of that stuff real time, and they really enjoyed that, and they put it on their TV in their office.
Yeah, that's cool. So any of like you showed us a lot of different roles earlier. You can make locations, you can make tenures, you can filter and display or aggregate data. Sounds like you are for your COO. Here's all the sales funding, and that's unique to him, whereas everybody else wants to know, how do I rank versus my peers? That's another cool thing. I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, hey, I've taken a bunch of your time today. This has been super awesome. Anything else you want to show us or mention here? I think we kind of ran the gauntlet here, but any successful contest you ran, or have you seen any significant spikes across the team? I know you've got good buy-in there and the TVs are everywhere, but anything you want to kind of mention that, a contest you guys ran that was really successful, or any specific gains you saw from the team? Would love to wrap up with kind of anything you want to share there.
Well, the contests and challenges, like I said, they peak really most of the end of the month. Right now, not much going on, but we had
17 days, 17 more funny days.
Yep. We had usually have some pretty interesting challenges that come up. The contests that come up do run pretty cool. One of the things we look forward to using that we haven't really utilized just yet is the fantasy. We're still, as much as we've been a client for a year and a half, with the amount of things that we like to customize and the amount of growth that we like to accomplish, we're still getting to that page where we're kind of norming out some metrics and figuring out and cleaning up some scorecards, and then we're going to have that fantasy up and running pretty soon.
I think hey, now's the time, man. It's people are doing their drafts, games are underway.
Yep. Everyone's good in that spirit.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I said, it's once you get that foot in the door of establishing those metrics and getting and understanding how the platform works, which is very simple, it works out real well. And then not only you get the benefit of the motivation on that sales team, but you get the reporting that you've been looking for your organization that helps you grow the business, that helps you evolve the process and find anywhere that you can improve. And that's been critical for us. And because of ambition and because of the spotlighting you've done on those processes is why we're so busy, not only just in sales, but in the technology side as well. And then my team's grown as well because of it, so that we can continue to increase the productivity and keep driving those metrics up.
Hey, well, Rob, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a really informative thing. I think I learned a couple things on here and how you can use those triggers. That was new to me. And I love your advanced metrics. Love everything you guys are doing. Let's take a look at that advanced analytics thing. If that's not working on yours, we can make sure it does. But thanks again, and we'll close it up here, man. Let me know whenever you make it to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we'll hang out down here.
Definitely. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Take care. Bye.